Now for global business updates, Rotus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning,
Morning,
Rufai.
Rotus.
Yeah, so Asian markets are up, mostly on China reopening. As we know, as was announced yesterday, China basically announced a relaxation of COVID curbs, which I think is a fallout or reaction to the protest, the quarantine protest that they've seen. So we've seen tech stocks in Hong Kong rise. We've seen gaming stocks like casinos in Macau, for instance, also rise as well, based on this anticipation of a reopening, which should stimulate aggregate demand. If you have more people going out and attending, going out, basically outdoor activities and so on and so forth. Even Disneyland Shanghai, they've closed about three times this year. They've also announced that they will be reopening today, I believe, basically also on the optimism around reopening of activities. I should also note, though, that Dr. Anthony Fauci, chief medical advisor to the Biden administration, has warned China that they should import some of the vaccines that are being used in the West because theirs is not as effective. And he's saying that this reopening could actually lead to trouble later down the line because of more infections. So we'll see how that turns out. In Japan, they released their revised third quarter GDP figures. It was a contraction of 0.8%. The initial estimate was a contraction of 1.2%. Analysts had estimated that it would be about 1.1%. Japan, of course, still facing a number of issues. The yen is at a 25 to 30-year low against the dollar. They've also been impacted by economic slowdowns due to other macroeconomic issues. So remember, Japan still keeps their interest rates relatively low. Yes, they do have a high debt to GDP, but then that's mostly yen-based. Speaking of raising rates, the Bank of England is expected to raise rates next week, although I think there's still a bit of a split on opinion on what to do. Inflation at a 41-year high. The same stories that we've been discussing with respect to them trying to slow down the inflationary impact. Energy prices high in the UK. Sunak trying to do what he's been doing for a period of time in terms of reducing pressure on the average Briton. Vladimir Putin is saying that the war in Ukraine could be prolonged. This is a bad signal for global markets, bad signal for supply chains, bad signal for commodity prices, and the impact on what it could have on the rest of the economy, or the rest of the global economy. He did also say he exercised caution on nuclear weapons, saying that Russia is at the head of the curve when it comes to nuclear facilities, but they said they're not going to wave it around like a razor. So I guess that could add some calm to global tensions. But it's him saying that the war is going to be prolonged. Remember, this war started in February. We're now in December. That is not a good sign. North America, I think we moved to Sam Bankman-Fried or Elon Musk. Sam Bankman-Fried is facing. We're starting to see, I guess, the law catching up with him. The New York Times is saying he could be facing a market manipulation probe that led to the collapse of other Bitcoin exchanges. There's things, I don't know if you guys have heard of Bitcoin whales. These are folks who own large amounts of Bitcoin and can actually move the markets based on how much they sell and how much they buy. Also, Maxine Waters, who is in the House of Representatives in the United States, says that he could also be forced to testify to the Congress, I think, next week or so. Elon Musk, the bankers behind the loan, the $13 billion loan that he took out in order to purchase Twitter, they're looking at possibly getting what's called a margin loan backed by Tesla stocks. I believe what's being said is about $3 billion of unsecured debt that Twitter is currently paying an 11.75% interest rate on, which amounts to quite a lot of money. In simple terms, you borrowed money to buy a company. The company now needs to make money to pay back that loan. And if the bankers, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, I think Mizuho and a couple other banks, if their worries are that Twitter is not going to make enough money and they now need to get more Tesla shares to back up the loan, the result is that Tesla shareholders are not going to be worried about how we are linking this company, Tesla, which is on its own, to the outcomes of Twitter. So Tesla stocks, although tech stocks in the United States are all down, but Tesla now is down, what is it, for 40 or is it 50%? So Musk is going to come under pressure for that. That's globally. In Africa, very quickly, the AFDB, African Development Bank, is looking at, I think, about $9 billion to assist low-income countries. They want to replenish their reserves for their 2023 to 2025 financing cycle. The thing is this, if you link this back to Putin saying that the war could prolong, all these measures that are being put forward to assist low-income countries that have been disproportionately impacted by the war in Ukraine are just going to continue to see more suffering down the line if the war continues. But credit to Akiwumi Additional, credit to the AFDB for trying to support them. And then finally, the NNPC saying that output has increased from, 900,000 barrels per day to 1.6, based on them fighting oil theft and the Transforcados pipeline and the other pipelines coming on stream. We will see it reflected, hopefully, in the numbers and also defense of the Naira, also FX income to Nigeria.
I mean, we'll see it in revenues.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the greatest tell on all of this. It's not about just saying, okay, the numbers are coming up. Yeah, the numbers are coming up, it's good. But how is the revenue coming out to impact people? So for me, I don't like to look at things in terms of the input alone. I like to look at it in terms of the output. How is that revenue going to impact on Nigeria's government revenue to be able to do things? Because for quite a while, let's not forget that the NFPC has not put any money in the pot.
Correct.
I'm saying it for the up-to time. The NFPC has not put money, and why I keep saying it deliberately, because a lot of people don't know the extent to that is hurting us as a country. The fact that one of our major cash cows is not putting money in. One of our major line items that draws money into the country is not putting money in. So survival has been a miracle, and that's why you see all the indices are jacked up against us. That's one. Number two, I'd like to talk about Twitter.
Yeah.
I think Elon Musk has been in more than he can chew. Anyway, he's a billionaire, he's got the money, he's got leverage, he's got over 200 billion, he's got Tesla shares and all of that. But he should not also forget that Tesla has got its own investors, and they will shudder when things like this happen. Because you saw what happened recently in the market. There was a bleep. Bernard Arnault became the world's richest man for a certain while, for a few while, and Elon Musk, overtook him again. Because what is happening now is that there's been that shakiness in trading as regards Tesla shares. So he pretty much hedged with his Tesla shares about all of this. And when you also look at the fact that he's not been meeting most of his Tesla quotas, and the shares are iffy, then he should be careful as regards that. And it's almost impossible. What's the revenue stream for Twitter? It's almost next to nothing. It's not a cash cow.
It makes about 4-5 billion a year, but that's from ads. But it's mostly ads. They're too dependent on ads.
4-5 billion compared to what Meta makes from ads. Are you kidding me?
Right.
4-5 billion compared to what Alphabet? 4-5 billion compared to what I call the blood money company. You know who I call them? Apple. That company has got so much cash. Jesus Christ.
250 billion.
Billion in revenue.
In cash.
In cash, sitting. Apple. So you can't compare with, let me call them two blood money companies, Alphabet, Meta, and the likes, and all of the other guys in cash.
Yeah.
That's a paltry sum, 4 or 5 billion in rev. So he should look at it deeply, and also he should stabilize things as regards, speech, and understanding that there should be responsibility with the platform. Because, take it or leave it, he's one of the most powerful men in the world today, because he's got a platform, just like Mark Zuckerberg. That's why you see when the French leader came to America, he also came to visit, apart from visiting the government in charge of America, he also visited another government called Elon Musk. Why? Because he owns media. And that's why I think it was Alexander Shatansky, the celebrated Russian writer, that said that a good writer or media outlet in the country is another government. That's why governments don't like truthful media. They don't like it because you're like another government.
Indeed.
You affect the people.
The fourth estate.
Okay, let's start with China.
Yeah.
Now, the Asian stocks, are led in, improvement in response to the new policy to losing zero COVID controls. That happened last week when a few local governments in Shenzhou and Zhuangzhou and Shenzhen, did that. But what is new with regard to China is that the State Council yesterday now decided officially to provide guidelines for the local governments. And what are these guidelines that they are now providing? One, you don't need to show negative test certificates before you access public places. People don't necessarily have to be quarantined in hospitals or quarantine facilities. You can be quarantined at home.
Yes.
And then, of course, some of the other measures have been relaxed. And, of course, the market responded positively to that because the State Council decided to take a trade decision. They ironically placed trade now, they prioritize it. The projected growth before was 5.5%. This year, Chinese economy has only expanded for about 3%. And from the economic data that was, trade data that was also released yesterday, they discovered that, look, imports and exports of China, have contracted significantly. So what they have taken is a pragmatic decision, which again should be instructive, because before now, President Xi Jinping was saying that, look, the zero COVID policy was scientific and it was the best way to go. But now we see China adjusting and the market has responded positively. And then part of the background to this, of course, was the protests, that attended the crisis in Foxconn,
yes,
that Apple manufacturing company. But we'll watch whether there will be a reversal or they will sustain it. But those who have been criticizing the Chinese administration will find justification in this, that, okay, market forces, trade has compelled China to take another decision. Now, secondly, Britain.
Yes.
The chief economist of Britain, saying that, look, they now have to increase interest rates again, maybe by about 50 basis points or by 75 percentage points, as they did in November, when interest rate went from 2.5 to 3%.
Yeah.
And his argument is understandable. He says, look, it's too early for us to take a positive attitude towards inflationary pressures, because Britain is already going into a prolonged recession.
Yeah.
And that the best thing to do is to keep raising interest rate. Of course, we all know what's happening in the UK. Cost of living is going
through the roof.
There's crisis in the mortgage sector. People are having issues with survival. But again, as in Africa, the chief economist, Mr. Peel, that's his name, was suggesting that, this is as a result of global forces, the war in Ukraine. Very few governments will take responsibility for economic crisis in their countries. Indeed. As for increase in crude oil production, well, good news, positive news. Mr. Balawunti was on this program yesterday. And the key point he made was, the adoption of a new security architecture, which has been, defined by collaboration between government, communities, the regulators, and also those private sector contractors. And he singled out Tantiana, and now all of this has helped. And then Shell has been able to return to the Forcados terminal. But the thing to do is to sustain this, to keep at it, to make sure that those measures are in place. Because if we get more revenue, okay, it will help for development purposes. President Buhari having pointed out that revenue is our major problem. And then, of course, maybe we'll be able to get closer to meeting our production quota. But he says it's technology-driven, but they have to sustain it. It's not to just record success within a window and assume that all is well. You know your country.
Of course, of course.
Absolutely. Well, just to speak on the Africa Development Bank and with its development partners raising 9 billion naira to dollars. And naira is in my head to respond to the most vulnerable low-income countries. Just a few days ago, when we were here, you were talking about the effects of climate change and impact. And one of the things that that Akinwumi Adesina, Nigeria's Akinwumi Adesina, I must say, is that it would be able to respond to these countries who are most vulnerable and disproportionately affected by climate change. Beyond that, I think it's also important to mention the new, the development partners is identified. Algeria and Morocco join in this particular funding cycle. But very importantly, Rotus, is for me the impact of Africa's response to Africa's problems. Not just having international funding and intervention is great, but in terms of we beginning to own our own, responding to our own economic challenges, and the fact that I must applaud Akinwumi Adesina for, the impact he's had with the African Development Bank. What I wanted to question, though, was Nigeria not being amongst the development partners contributing to this fund.
Because you need money.
Yeah, we need. It is for me. The question it raises is that at what point are we going to begin to admit or take on the stance of the big brother of of Africa if we're not able to contribute, because money talks, money speaks if we're not able to contribute. But as we have seen, hopefully with linking that to the NNPC story and raising our production, hopefully with the income we can begin to play our role as big brother in Africa. But excellent news. And then of course with China bowing to, shall we say, pressure, it's important, like you mentioned, yes, short-term successes in the stocks. However, long-term, if it's not well contained and we go back to COVID, then it would defeat the entire purpose. So I don't think the Chinese government would be taking any, will be playing around at any point. However, it's important for them to continue to uphold the COVID restrictions. Very important, despite opening the economy, but still ensuring that people are protected and we do not have a repeat of COVID shutting down the economy again, and of course stocks going down.
Indeed.
Agreed. And I have to mention on Twitter that Elon Musk is poised to be the most influential individual. Bearing in mind, like you said, his media influence and of course his money, his place as #1 richest man in the world. So,
but he's turning his office in San Francisco into a hotel of sorts because he says he now sleeps in the office, and he still has to worry about the Congress raising questions about foreign ownership.
Exactly.
That 5.5% that is owned by Kingdom Holdings Limited. Of Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rotis.
Thank you.
With giving us global and African news business updates.